Well, hello there, and welcome to another Under the Cowling segment where we get a little bit deeper into our aircraft and some of the events that happened throughout history. I have Les Salz with me this morning and Dean Hunter, and we're going to talk about this big airplane behind me, the T-28. Primarily, we're going to talk about not as much training and more about combat and effective use of the airplane. And then Les will regale us with some of his stories on the airplane as well.
Thank you.
You still own one of these?
Yes, I do.
You do. Well, good morning, gentlemen. Before we get started, Greg is. We always lead this off. He is a very good host. If you're feeling a little peaked, he has a fresh nap for you to be able to wipe down.
Thank you.
There is a nice cold, sparkling beverage, non-alcoholic. Because we don't want to liquor you up this early in the morning. This is a family show. And then we, of course, if your blood sugar is dropping, you have a little cookie here you can eat. But so good morning and welcome. This airplane in the collection, this particular aircraft was donated to us about 7 years ago. It came... I think it was out of Oklahoma. It came out, and it was an interesting airplane because it was something I didn't really know much about at the time. When it came in, I wasn't really familiar with the airplane. It has grown on me. It does sound like a ruptured goat when it flies by, but it's grown on me. But and it does a lot of flyover work for us now. Very, very tough airplane. We have the cowling up so you can see that. And under the cowling, hence the name of the show. See, we're right there. We've fulfilled the mission. We're done.
Are we done?
We're done.
We get paid?
We're finished.
Okay.
So, but a little known fact, we have a lot of trainers in the collection. A lot of trainers throughout aviation were pressed into service as attack aircraft. And this was no different, primarily because they were cheap. They were plentiful, they were cheap, they're easy to fly, fairly easy to maintain. If you lost one, you didn't weep. And third world air forces or clandestine air forces used them. Dumb bombs, iron bombs, machine guns, not a lot of sophistication. But when you want to go out and bomb somebody cheaply, the trainers are a way to do it, as opposed to the backbone you need to fly these fighters. So maybe we'll jump into that. Dean, now you started in the Marines, right?
Yes, I did.
And where'd you start out?
On the second wave of the Incheon landing with 4,300 other Marines.
Really?
And only 200 of us walked out of there.
Ooh.
Really? So you landed at Incheon. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Not everybody's familiar with the Korean War. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was, I didn't even know. I joined the Marine Corps in, 1950, January, when I was in high school, because I wanted to get an appointment to the Naval Academy. There were 32 guys in my graduating class, and 15 of them went to the Naval Academy. I couldn't get in because my dad wasn't an officer. But I had a football scholarship to the University of California, and I was up there in Pappy Waldorf's freshman orientation program. I got a telegram from our nice President Truman offering me a 17-day world cruise to Yokohama. Then down at the bottom it said you have 24 hours to report to active duty. Well, that's how it got started.
Really?
And it did take 17 days to get over there. When we arrived in Yokohama, they marched us up to an Army BX and put us in the Army Class A uniforms, because we were all different things we had on. And then they marched us down to a warehouse, and because I was a big kid, they gave me a BAR. I didn't even know what the heck it was.
Browning automatic rifle,
yeah.
30 caliber.
Well, 20 calibers, that's what appealed to me. Everybody else got M1s.
Right.
So they said between there and the Incheon landing, they'd teach me how to field strip it and shoot it, which they did. But I learned a lot walking because it was a long walk. MacArthur split the forces at Incheon. Half of the battalion went up to take over Kempo Air Base so he could get supplies in there. The other half, which I got caught in, headed for K3, which was about 25 miles away. And we got hit by, I'd say a Viet Cong, I'm in the wrong time, by a North Korean mortar attack. And I remember there was a cave about 20 yards off from where I was walking. I was in that cave so fast you couldn't believe it. But my buddy said I came out faster than I went in because I hit spider webs.
Oh.
They laughed about that for hours. Anyway, we got up to K3, and they said we're just going to wait until they get enough guys. And then we were going up to Hagaroo-Ri, and I had no idea where that was. But we were marching up there, and every week we'd get an OSS agent into our little evening camping area. And first one that happened was a major, and he came yelling in there and wanted to see who is the commander. Well, the commanders are always second lieutenants. And he said he needed 14 Marines for a classified assignment. Well, this was one of those things in your life which you just don't believe. The entire platoon stood up. And it was so impressive you couldn't believe it. And he just said, you, and you, and I was one of those yous. So we went 18 miles up across the country and blew up a warehouse up there. On the way home, we got caught by the North Koreans, and we were traversing up the side of a hill, and they killed everybody. They hit us with mortars, and a mortar went off in front of me, killed the 2 Marines there, blew me over the side and killed a Marine behind me. And they killed everybody, but they didn't know I was down the hill. And
so you lost the entire. First of all, OSS is kind of the forerunner of the CIA.
Yes, it was.
The intelligence officer.
Yes.
And then when they hit you, so the entire patrol was killed with the exception of you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I was knocked out, and I was down in a bunch of bushes about, maybe 35, 40 feet. And they didn't see me, and when I came to, I heard them talking up there, and they were desecrating the bodies and taking the ammo and guns and things like that. And I just stayed there, and I stayed there the whole day. I crawled further into the brush, and that night I crawled out, and I made it back to our lines. I had one heck of a time. We had a secret password, but Marines don't have a tendency to remember very far. And they'd rather shoot first and ask questions later. And they did. They shot at me, and I'm screaming at them. I'm an American, I'm a Marine, but they finally let me through. And to make a long story short, I finally got up to Hagaroo-Ri, and I was up there in November of 1950, and there was a colonel there. His name was Howling Mad Smith. That was his nickname. And I remember him getting up on a box about 20 yards from me. He had a megaphone, and he was going around in a circle saying, Marines, Marines, Marines. I guess I got to clean up my thought. I can't say the nasty words he used. You Marines are surrounded by...
Yeah, this is a kid show. We'll trigger the YouTube algorithm and they'll turn us off.
Well, anyway, he said, Marines, Marines, Marines. He says, you SOBs can really be happy. He said, you are surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers. He said, you SOBs can shoot in any direction. Well, everybody went, yay! And that's exactly what we did. And from there down to Hagaroo-Ri, it was roughly 12, 13 miles down there. I was one of the last 3 Marines to get into there. We lost 1,500 Marines, and the Chinese lost 60,000 soldiers. So that tells you something about the Marines. In any event, I got into Hagaroo-Ri, Hagaroo-Ri, and there was a gunny there, sergeant, and he yelled at me, asked me what my rank was, and I said, private, no class. He says, you're now a corporal, get up here. Bring those other 2 Marines with you. He had a half-track there with a 50 caliber machine gun on it. There were 4 Goonie birds there, and they were all loaded with dead and wounded. But the Chinese had the other end of this little runway secured. So he wanted to put this half-track on one side of the runway, and he said, that's what we'll do. And this young lieutenant jumped out of this Goonie bird. They didn't have doors on them in those days. And he was running across from me, and he says, come with me, Sergeant. Well, I wasn't a sergeant, but I ran with him, but I couldn't catch up with this guy. Thank God I came around the back end. There was a Corsair parked up there, He jumped in it, turned on the battery, hit the override, and all 6 machine guns went off. He said, grab your other Marines, we're going to move this down, put it on the other side of the runway. That'll give us 7 50 caliber machine guns. That's what we did. Well, the first aircraft didn't wait for us. Tried to take off. The Chinese shot them down. Everybody was killed. The other 2 waited. We gave them firepower. Then the third one was this lieutenant came back, and he stood in the doorway, and he said to me, he said, son, he said, get your other 2 Marines and get in here. And I looked at him and I said, sir, I said, if we get in there, you won't get out. And I saluted him, and he saluted me, and it was just, I'd never seen an officer cry. There were tears running down his cheeks. So he got in and took off and flew back over and wagged his wings. I'm going to change the story now. It's 9 years later. I'm in the Air Force. I'm at March Air Force Base.
Which is just over the hill here, yeah.
Just over the hill. And I got screwed in the SAC. I was number 1 in my graduating class of 86 F fighters. And what I got was my choice of SAC bases. I wound up at March. And when I went through the B-47 training, all of us, we hated multi-engine pilots. And every morning we'd smoke cigars and use terrible language. And I went through that, went through the nuclear weapons school, went down to Little Rock. The first flight I had, we were in the briefing room, and 2 co-pilots and 2 upgrading guys were there. And you had to have 2,500 hours in those days to upgrade to a aircraft commander in a B-47. And after sitting there for 3 hours, I walked over to this IP, instructor pilot, and I said, what's the mission of the co-pilots? And he looked at me and he stood up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, son, your mission is to listen to SAC talk. Well, you can imagine how that went over.
Right.
I didn't say anything to him, but I got stuck in the 5th man seat in that aircraft. We flew for 7 hours and just bounced like the dickens because these guys were learning how to land a thing. I walked in after the flight was over into the squadron commander's office, ripped my Velcro wings off, threw them on his table, told him I was all through. He did his best to change my mind. Well, I caught every, excuse my language, shit detail there was. And we were the only crew that graduated non-combat ready. So when I came back to March Air Force Base, my squadron commander had me in a brace, and I thought he was a former Marine because he was going around me. He was shouting and spitting on me. And he said, finally, he said, I'm going to 3912 you, which is a dishonorable discharge. He said, in the meantime, you're going to get everything I can get, every shit detail, basically. So he called me into his office one Monday morning. He said, I want you to report to the officers club Friday morning. You're on the decorations committee for the officers' wives club party. So I went down there, and there were 6 of us, and we pasted balloons and things all over the place. And about 4 o'clock, the ops officer came in, and he was in a blue class A uniform. He walked over and got 6 things of beer, came over and said to us, you guys sit down, you've done a good job. And we're sitting there, and he says, I know everybody, but I know that I don't know everybody, but I know this guy. He's pointing right at me because, well, he's the ops officer. So anyway, this kid sitting next to me was the dumbest lieutenant in the world. He asked his colonel while he was talking, he says, Colonel, he says, what are those merit badges on your shoulder? Oh, you don't say something like that. And the colonel looked at him, and if looks could kill, he was dead. And the colonel was sputtering for a second, and this dumb lieutenant said, Colonel, what's your top merit badge up there? Well, that blew it. He said it was a Distinguished Flying Cross. So everybody said, well, how did you get it? So he started telling his story. And he got into it about maybe a minute and a half, and I stood up and I said, sir, I'd like to make a toast. And of course, I mean, he glared at me like I was dead. I said, sir, I said, to the 3 Marines you left behind. And he stood up and started crying. Came around, grabbed me, hugged me. He said, he said, you were one of those 3. And I said, yes, sir. He says, I want you and your wife here tonight, and I want you in my office Monday morning. Well, that changed my whole military career.
Wow.
So that was kind of an interesting experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and for the folks at home, if you want to ask questions, or folks watching this, go ahead and put questions into the chat room. We'll take questions.
Sure.
This is live. We will take questions if you have questions for our guests today. I don't think Dean, people really understand how nasty. I did. We interview folks and we honor folks, and John Nacita was was in the United States Army, and he was with an artillery battery that was in Korea. They got caught up at the Chosin, and they were going around behind without getting too detailed, but the Marines were in one area, and then there was an Army group on the other side. The Army group, he was going around behind the Marines when the Chinese attacked, and they wiped the Army guys, just completely wiped them out. And I think he had like 105. I don't think they were 155s. I think they were 105.
They were 105s.
And he tells a story about the attacks from the Chinese were so heavy that at one point they had taken the stops out of the artillery, and they were literally firing the artillery point blank. In other words, straight out. You see, because and he said the Marines were coming through the lines, retreating, and it was cold, and they weren't going to leave the dead. And the Army group that was on the other side of these Marines, this was no quarter. I mean, and Afghanistan and Iraq, some of the troops, the modern troops, you talk about that they're in deep combat in Afghanistan or in Iraq, was the same thing. You didn't leave wounded, and the North Koreans would come in and the Army was retreating out of there, and they had wounded, and the North Koreans came in and killed every last one of them. They overran the convoy. And a similar story, your story reminded me, there was one guy that I interviewed that was wounded, and they didn't realize that he was still alive, and they went through that entire convoy and shot every one of the wounded soldiers. And that was not, World War II, Band of Brothers, and some of the other things, you see some of it, where as opposed to the real patriotic movies where, yes sir, but the reality of combat, whether it's World War II or on, when you get in the heat of combat, they showed no quarter. There was not uncommon that
the worst
people
problem
get shot.
we had leaving Hageroo was it was 50 degrees below zero.
Wow.
And that was tough. We had to put our rifles inside our sleeping bags where you couldn't fire them. And it was a tough time.
It's interesting now, the United States, if you think about if we were in combat like that, and I've said this before, and we suffered those kinds of losses, even in Vietnam, we've done a thing on the 105, the number of aircraft that were shot down, and some of the things that went on with social media and everything else, would people tolerate that? Because it's not like it used to be where you see the propaganda films or the black and white movies in the theater. Now this stuff's coming in real time. So let's move on. So you were in Korea, so you got into the Air Force.
I did.
How in the world did you end up in T-28s?
I hated SAC. I'm sorry.
SAC was Strategic
But I had a
Air
good career
Command.
in SAC. It took 2,500 hours as a co-pilot in order to move up to an aircraft commander. I upgraded with 400 hours, and I was at Little Rock when this happened. And I'd worked with this guy who was a major, and he and I developed the ECM program for the entire Air Force.
It's electronic countermeasures.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he went from major to full colonel in 6 months, and they wanted him to take over the 555 up at Forbes Air Force Base, which were flying spook missions, and he wanted me to go up there, and he said he'd get me upgraded.
Those are so spooks are, I'm decoding here, spooks are covert,
very covert
operations.
They didn't exist, so to speak.
That's kind of what Les does all the time. We never really know what he's doing. He's always covert. I'm going to get to you, Les. We're going to get through Dean here in a minute.
I don't know what I'm doing a lot of it too.
Anyway, I upgraded, and I had the only first lieutenant aircraft in 8th Air Force out of Little Rock, and I just wasn't, I didn't like SAC, let's put it that way, and no fighter pilot would. Any event,
they were flying, but they were flying like F-84s, weren't they? Were they still flying single-engine fighters for
yeah,
new
84s,
strike?
86s, That's all we had.
And
Then
they were flying
100s came
nukes.
along.
They were flying nukes on those airplanes, weren't they? Or were you flying fighter cover for the heavy bombers?
You mean in B-47s?
Yeah.
No, we were hitting strategic targets. We had the 100s by that time, and they were carrying nukes, small nukes. And their job was to knock out the Russian airfields around Russia all the way. And then we came in behind them.
Were you doing the lob maneuver in that airplane, that big?
That was the problem, yeah. Our
Why don't
original
you describe the lob maneuver?
labs, okay?
Yeah.
If you think about it, Gary Francis Powers.
I always call it lob because you're lob, but it's lab. You're throwing something at. You're throwing a nuke
I'll get
at
to
it.
it.
Yeah.
Gary Francis Powers got shot down in 1962, and at that time, our bombing altitude in Russia was 42,000 feet. So all of a sudden, SAC said, we can't go in at 42,000 feet anymore. So we're going to redo.
And that was because of the Russians had perfected
Russians
a
had
surface-to-air missile.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so SAC came out with this labs maneuver and said, first of all, we're going to try it. The first 6 crews that tried it were all killed because you come in 100 feet, 200 feet off the deck at 600 miles an hour. When you hit the IP, the initial point, as soon as you started your pull-up, 4 Gs, when you hit 4 Gs, your bomb bay door would come open and a 14 to 16,000 pound weapon would leave and go for the target. But the problem was the aircraft would go just like this, and then it would go just like that and crash.
So that was a CG issue, center of gravity issue, or in the turn, or it would. What was
Well,
the?
you only had 6,000 pounds of thrust out of each engine
Right.
in a B-47.
Right.
And the minute you lost 14 or 16,000 pounds, something's going to happen.
Right.
Well, the aircraft would go just like this. And so basically you're vertical.
So it just stalled.
Yeah, it just stalled. And the
Okay.
first 6 crews were killed.
Wow.
So SAC said, okay, from now on, you're just going to do it when we go to war. Well, you can
Really?
imagine how that hit everybody.
Suicide mission.
Yeah, well, in the meantime, one of my buddies that lived down from me 3 or 4 houses in Little Rock called me up one day and he says, hey, Dean, he said, first of all, General LeMay wouldn't allow Air Force assignments to come on SAC basis because it was too important, SAC was. Well, he called me up and said he had a classified message on his desk where the Air Force wanted pilots to volunteer for World War II fighters, propeller fighters, where they could fly in a foreign country and not have an Air Force flight suit on. So I went up there, and it took me about 45 minutes to fill out all this paperwork, send it in. I was really excited. 3 months went by, and I thought, oh, well, nobody called. I missed the cut. I was on final approach one day on a GCA, and a GCA operator told me to call a command post and monitor guard, which I did. And they said, Lieutenant, as soon as you land, report to the wing commander. Well, that's like being told to go to the principal of the school. So I got in my Jeep and drove up there, and he invited me into this room, and there was a major in there. And for the next 30 minutes, we talked about football, fishing, flying, you name it. Nothing exciting, except he did ask me 2 questions during this conversation. Would I be willing to fly a World War II prop fighter where I couldn't wear an Air Force uniform? Well, hell yes. Then the second thing he asked me was later on, said, if you got shot down, would you be willing to admit that you're not a member of the American military? Well, the answer again was yes. So I walked out of there thinking, boy, this is really exciting. 3 more months went by, and I gave up. I figured, they didn't want me. I got a call the same way on final approach, only this time the command post said to me, Lieutenant, as soon as you land, report immediately to the wing commander. That was a little different. So I went up there, and it was just the wing commander and myself in his office, and he pulled out these classified envelopes, and they were from the DIA. And I didn't know what the hell the DIA was, and he'd never seen anything like that. So we signed everything and opened them up, and I had a a ticket to Wichita, Kansas the next morning, and I couldn't tell anybody, including my wife, where I was going or what I was going to do. So I got on this airplane and I flew to Wichita, and my order said you go down to the train station, and I had a ticket, and I was going to Blue Eye, Missouri. I don't know if you ever heard of that. When the train stopped, there was just a gas station, a trading post, and a Greyhound bus depot. That was it. And I got out, and my order said to go to the Greyhound bus depot. I had a key, and I unlocked the doors, the locker, and this was getting to be kind of exciting, because this did not happen to Air Force pilots at that time. And now I had a ticket to Florida to Fort Walton Beach. I never heard of that either. So 18 hours, I got out of the bus, and there was a sergeant there, and he had a picture of me, and he says, "Are you Lieutenant Hunter?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Get in my Jeep." I got in his Jeep, and I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "You're going to Eglin Air Force Base." I'd never been to Eglin Air Force Base, and I told him. He said, "It's the largest Air Force installation in the United States." He said, "There are 23 separate runways inside the confines of Eglin." I didn't know that. So I went to Eglin 23 first, got a week's briefing, actually not quite, about four and a half days. Then I went down to Eglin 9, checked out in the T-28. And,
which is this airplane behind us, yeah.
Yes, this marvelous, wonderful airplane.
Do you remember what model you checked down in? Was it a...
It was a D model.
Was it a D?
Yeah, I think, it was a D, because we had 3-bladed props.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the engine power was, but I didn't pay any attention to that.
So you checked out and...
Just got checked out. And they called us into a meeting after a month or so and said, "Okay, guys," they notified 6 of us. They said, "You guys are going to Travis Air Force Base, and you're going on a secret mission." That's all they told us. So I told the guys, I said, "Look," I said, "let's all arrive at Travis 3 days early, and we'll go up to San Francisco to the top of the mark and party and go wherever we're going." Well, I got up here and went into my BOQ room, and when I went upstairs, there was 2 beds in there, and there was a hat like this on one of the things, and it was a Green Berets hat. And of course, I introduced myself to this guy, and he was going out that night. His name was Carl Bradshaw. And I said, "Well, come on over, eat dinner with us." We got him drunk. He missed his flight. We took him to the top of the mark. We all got drunk. We came back. We missed our flight, and we were really scared. We were sitting in the BOQ room trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I said, "Well, I'm going down to base ops," and I said, I'll see if I can't figure something out. Well, I got down there, and there was a crew down there mission planning in a 135, and I asked the aircraft commander, I said, "Where are you going?" He told me Clark Air Base, and I told him what we had done, and all got drunk, etc., and we didn't want to tell anybody. He says, "Go get your guys and bring them down here," and he says, "We'll put them in an aircraft." He says, "I can't guarantee you first class places, but we'll get you there." So we took off, and 4 hours out, we lost a generator on one of the aircraft engines, so we had to land at Honolulu. And he told us, he said, "We've got to go get crew rest." He said, "Meet us here in the morning at 6:30. Well, we went to the officers club and drank Mai Tais for 6 hours. You can imagine how we were. How we found the airplane again, I don't know, because I do not remember the flight from there to Clark. I woke up at Clark. In any event, we
relate to that.
we went down to personnel there, and the young sergeant said, we showed him our orders, and he says he didn't know where it was. It was APO 27. He said, "It's classified." I said, "Well, have you got a master here?" And he said, "Yes." He went and got the master sergeant. He didn't know where it was. He said, "Gentlemen," he says, 2 blocks down is 13th Air Force. Go down there and they'll tell you where you're going." So we walked down there, and this colonel looked at our orders and said, "I don't know where that is." He says, "But it's classified." He said, "Come on in tomorrow morning and I'll tell you." So we partied that night and went in there the next morning. We're all sitting in this room. He was really excited. He says, "You're going to Vietnam." And we all looked at each other and said, "Where the hell is Vietnam?"
So what year was this?
That was 1963.
Wow.
So
that's like way early.
Yeah. Oh, yes, very definitely. So we We all laughed for a while and tried to tell him where the hell it was, and nobody knew. So he said there's a 1:30 going out here every Thursday night, and he says you can get on it or wait 7 days and get on the next one. Well, there was 3 airlines landing there with stewardesses. The other guys decided to wait and party, and I said, well, I felt bad about Carl because I'd screwed him up, so I got on the airplane with him. We landed at Saigon International, and it was about, 1 o'clock or 2 in the morning, raining like the dickens. And this lieutenant shows up in a 4x4 with no lid on it. And he says, gentlemen, there's 14 of us on this airplane. And he says, whenever I stop, 2 of you get off, I'll stop in front of a hotel. So we stopped. The second stop was where we got off. I didn't know this other captain, and we both got off. We were both captains then. And it was a Caravel Hotel. And it was only a block and a half from the presidential palace. Well, we went in and checked in. Well, we had trouble because the English-speaking guy wasn't on the counter. We put our money on there, and he just, God knows what he took. But he gave us a key, and we went up there. And we got undressed, and we were getting in bed and just about ready to turn the lights off. And we heard tanks coming down the street, firing, and machine guns going off, and aircraft were strafing buildings. And we said, what the hell is going on? Well, I walked over and opened the door, and coming down the hallway was probably the most beautiful woman you ever laid eyes on. She was a reporter for U.S. News and World Report. She had 2 cases of Heineken's, and I stepped out there. I'm in my shorts, and I had my 38 on her. And she says, are you going to shoot? And I said, no. I said, where are you going? And she says, I'm going upstairs. He said, you want to come up and I'll tell you what's going on? I said, yes, give us a chance to put our pants on. We put our pants on, went upstairs with her, and she said, the presidential palace is down there. She said, this is a DM coup. Well, I didn't know what the hell a coup was, but boy, it was a hell of a fight going on. So we were looking there, and the troops were down there, and we were throwing empty beer cans on them. And well, it all quieted down, and the next morning, she told us that there'd be a gray bus coming by and just get on it. She said, it's a Navy bus. They'll take you back to Tonsanut. Well, I got back to Tonsanut and finally got a lieutenant who called Benoit, where our home base was 55 miles north of there. And the guy came down and picked me up, and that was my introduction to the First Air Commandos.
So you flew with the first air. How many aircraft were in the?
There were 24 there, and I was a 24th pilot.
24th pilot.
Yeah,
So you had 24 airplanes straight up.
That was November of '63. When I left in June of '64, there was only 3 airplanes left.
3 airplanes left.
And we lost that many pilots.
You lost an equivalent. So
Oh yeah.
we were flying.
We were flying AD-28.
Right.
We had 4 of those aircraft up at Da Nang, which was I Corps. We had 4 at Pleiku, which was 2 Corps. Home base was Benoit, and 3 Corps where Saigon was. And then down in the Delta, we had Sac Train, and that was the worst place of all to go.
What were were you flying with a forward air controller that was calling it in, or how? Were you?
Yes.
So there's our forward air controller, or was it? These were Laotians, right?
That was one of the problems. We'd go down there, and the leader, we had nothing in our aircraft. I mean, not even an ADF, and we'd take off.
You're talking about a direction finder. You had no navigation.
Right.
Okay.
What we do is you get a call from emergency call, and it'd give you Willie Sierra 431215, and those were secret coordinates, and you had block letters on your map.
There's a grid coordinates on your map.
Yeah.
Yep.
So whoever got stuck with leading had to look out there and figure out where this area was, and so he'd take off once he got joined up, and that's where we go. And when you got about 16, 17 minutes out, he'd start calling for the forward air controller. If it were a Laotian or a South Vietnamese, they never came up. So we'd spread out, and this was always a lot of fun. Whoever spotted him got to come in behind him about 300 and pull straight up, and it'd flip him over, and he'd go into a spin, and he'd come up immediately. If it was a GI, no sweat, he'd take care of us.
Really? Would would they pop smoke on the ground, or
Yeah.
were you?
They'd fire a Willie Peter, white phosphorus,
On
and then they'd say, you need to, the target is 20 or 30 yards northeast of there or northwest.
So people who are listening to this, you're flying combat, right? You're flying
Yes.
strikes. You got what? Rockets, iron bombs.
It depends. This aircraft, the AD-28D, had built-up wings. We had 6 hard points on it. We carried, if we carried two 250-pound bombs, we had 17 rockets on each wing. If we carried 500-pound bombs, 2 of them, 1 on each wing, again we had 17 rockets on there. Our machine guns, we only had 2 machine guns, and they had 100 round ammunition in a pod, which didn't last more than 7 or 8 seconds. So we modified that and put 1,500 rounds in there.
Do you?
And we burn up the guns every day.
So, again, for folks at home, if you want to ask a question, shoot that on in for Greg. Now, did you ever have any close calls? Did you get hit by ground fire?
Oh God, the worst one I had was, I think, 41 bullet holes.
In this area?
Yeah, the average flight was 8 to 10 bullet holes in the empennage.
Really?
Yeah.
So in the tail.
Yeah, the guys had a stand down there, and they had a round thing on there, and they had a model of a T-28, a Goonie Bird, and whatever else. He'd put that up there, and that's what he'd track with. Well, it didn't work very well at all. So that saved the lives of a lot of guys.
What were they? What was the AAA on the ground? Was it
14 points something, 50 caliber basically.
50 caliber machine guns. So,
but our combat altitude was only 1,500 feet, so we were inside the envelope.
you were even small arms. I mean, they could have hit you with a slingshot.
Yeah, you could see them coming up all the time.
Really?
But you didn't pay any attention to them.
So, Les will throw you into this. Dean is out bombing Laotians in the countryside. Now, you were Army. You were training.
Right.
In the Army. You were training guys. When did you end up in the service?
Started July of '66, and ended
Oh,
up,
you're a youngling compared to.
Oh yeah, he was there way before me,
Yeah.
and then ended up at Fort Ord Frenchie Army Airfield doing transition training. Guys doing their instrument checks and stuff like that.
For Army, right?
For the
and
Army.
What was the Army flying at that time?
Well, the only ones that I saw were T-41, Otter, and the Beaver,
Okay.
and that's it.
Dan Gilbertson would like that a lot. He's
Yes,
a
he would.
big Beaver pilot. He loves the Beaver.
Yeah,
So you were doing a lot of link training down there.
lots. I probably.
Why don't you tell people what a link trainer is for those of us that.
It's if you've seen it in television, it's a little airplane that sits on a bellows, air-powered bellows with the wings, and you've got extremely basic instruments.
Pardon me, it's a sweat box.
It's a
Yes,
sweat
it is.
box. There you go.
Well, Dean, I got about 600 hours in that stupid thing.
Yeah.
And they close you into it, and the instructor has a big table, probably 5 by 6, big Lexan, and a little a tracker on ink that follows you around and mimics what you do on the trainer. And so if they give you a certain maneuver, they watch how you do this thing, and you have exercises that you do that show your proficiency in the thing.
How long did you? You're growling there. Your phone is growling.
My phone is starting up.
Yeah. So what? How long were you in the service?
Not quite 3 years.
Okay. And then that was your. You were enjoying flying. What you did? Now you went on. You were FAA.
Well, I went back after I got out of the service. I went back to school, finished my aero degree,
Yeah.
and then looking for an airline job, which at the time wasn't existent. I went into the FAA as an air traffic controller.
And you were ultimately, for people who don't know it, you're the chair of our flight standards committee. We actually look at the pilots that fly our airplanes
Yes, we
a
do.
little bit
Closely.
And you were an FAA examiner, correct?
I still am. I've done flight examining work since 1988, 89, up through present day.
And primarily in these
Well,
Your ratings. Go over your ratings. What were you your flight examiner for?
about 50 different airplanes. They did categories. There was a D category, an E
Right.
category, which basically was all large twin-engine airplanes with the nose, and then tailwheel airplanes and jets.
Okay.
And whatever was air, and then some of the smaller airplanes, L-39, L-29, T-37, and this.
There goes one of those fine jets by
There
us.
goes-
Now you own a T28.
Yes,
right?
I do.
Is it a B?
B model. Actually, I think it owns me.
It owns you.
It
Well,
owns-
they generally do after a
Yes, they
while,
do.
right?
Yes,
they
they
do own you. Now, Dean, did you ever have any in-flight fires or any of that kind of stuff?
No, I had roughly 1,400 hours of combat in this machine. And our aircraft were so dirty you couldn't believe it.
Camouflage.
But, that's what I told our maintenance crews out here. If you quit cleaning this thing, it'd be fine. But anyway,
Oh yeah, this thing with the oil on this airplane
oh yeah.
is just.
But anyway, I had 1,400 hours of combat in this machine. It was a marvelous aircraft. The only problem was when the agency put the big engine in there, they didn't modify the firewall, and the temperature in the cockpit was between 135 and 150 degrees. That was pretty tough in Vietnam.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So,
Well-
interesting. This airplane has kind of been the poor man's fighter, right? When it came back to the United States, it was affordable, as opposed to a P-51. I mean, if we even now, we look at it in our operation. If we're going to do flyovers, rather than burn that V12, right? Whatever that is,
It's a very
expensive
user-friendly
engine.
airplane.
It seems to be fairly tough, fairly high G, as far
Yeah.
as what you were doing with it.
Oh God, yes. You wouldn't believe the G's we put on them. I mean,
That's a gravitational
our
force
combat
on the
altitude was
airplane.
1,500 feet.
Right.
Okay, that's if we're bombing. If we're dropping napalm, we're at 20 feet. And then you have
20 feet.
2-0, yeah. And you're getting shot at. And you really pull up once you drop it. And that the G's, well, even on a bomb run, you put 8-10 G's on a T-28.
Really?
Yeah, but that went on for I don't know how many months. They lost 6 B-26s because the wings came off, but they had 14 forward-firing guns, and the pilots were flying them like fighters, and that didn't work.
Putting too much G on the airplane.
Too many Gs. And I think, to my knowledge, we lost 3 or 4 where the wings came off of T-28s.
Really?
Yeah, so we slowed our Gs down to, it was terrible, I hate to say this, a half a G pulling off of a bomb run or pull out. Well, you didn't want to have the wing come off.
Right.
And you're subjecting yourself to more bullets, but what the hell,
If the
going
airplane
fast.
did not have an ejection seat.
No.
So if you had a problem, you're going to ride this airplane in until it stops.
Absolutely.
You're not going to get out. What was the if you were captured?
You're dead.
Yeah, that's
When I got to Vietnam, there were I was the 24th pilot in the squadron, and there was posters all over South Vietnam, just like these pictures here. How they got them, I don't know, but it was $375,000 US to kill one of them and cut the head off. 2 of our guys went down. They chopped their heads off and paraded them through the villages, and it really pissed everybody off. But it was just, that's the way it was.
So they had pictures of you up
Yes,
and bounties.
yes,
Wow.
yeah.
Plus, we have to think about that for the pilots. If they don't behave, we'll put a picture up and a bounty.
Well,
But
We can do that. We
there
can
you
do
go.
that.
I started out in November as a 24th pilot, and I left, my last mission was on June 25th, 64. That's only 7 months. So I was flying 4 and 5 hours a day. A normal day was 3 missions, 9 hours. If you flew 4 missions, you got 2 hours of sleep. If you flew 5 missions, you got no sleep, and you're right on the schedule the next morning.
Were you going out of unimproved strips?
Oh, absolutely.
So dirt strips.
Well, sometimes we had PSP, but dirt.
PSP, which is metal,
Yeah, metal.
aggregate on the ground. We have some of it where we store stuff, but we don't fly off of it.
Yeah.
That's and that stuff was really popular in World War II in the island hopping campaign
Yeah.
and stuff like that. What was the load of the airplane going out? What do you think your bomb load was?
Well, if we had napalm, there were 250. I thought they were heavier, but I found out later they were 250-pound cans, because what happened at the end of World War II, we gave the French 2 squadrons of F-8 fighters, wherever ours is over here. Mm-hmm. And after Dien Bien Phu, the French had pranged all these F-8s all over the countryside. When I got there in '63, we borrowed an Army HH-43 helicopter and went out and picked up 5 of them and put one of them back together.
And pranged is a military term for they crashed it. They bent the airplane.
Everybody that wanted to fly it got a chance to fly it.
Yeah.
One of our guys wiped it out, but it was just one of those things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
but anyway, there were our squadron commander went down to Saigon, where he found them in a warehouse. He found 2,500 fuel tanks off for the F-8s, and so he trucked them out to Benoit, and those became our napalm bombs. And the problem we had was we didn't have any fuses, so we had to go to the Army and get an
igniter.
Well, it was like a beer can, and you stuck it in the thing and you turned it. But we had to put tape around there to keep it from bubbling out. But once you dropped it, all it had to do was make one turn, and it was armed.
And
the problem was, once you dropped the napalm, oftentimes the damn igniter would fly out, so you'd have to come back and strafe it.
To ignite it.
Yeah, that was the problem.
That's crazy. Well, Les, now you, not in this airplane, but you have, and quickly, because we've got about 5, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, we're talking about harrowing experiences, not in this airplane, but you had a harrowing experience in another airplane that we fly, which is a DC-3. You had an in-flight fire in a DC-3.
Correct.
And that was the starboard engine?
Yes.
The right engine.
Right engine.
So, quickly, you took off.
Well, short synopsis, Reader's Digest style. I was flying the DC-3s for the FAA on flight check, going from Los Angeles to Oxnard. Technicians in the back said the right generator had quit. Our operation was we could either shut it down or keep it running until we found maintenance. While our maintenance crew was at Magoo, we decided to do an ILS check, instrument landing system check, at Oxnard, and then hop over to Magoo. On the way down, the engine caught fire, oil fire, and the cowling just disappeared.
And for those that are not familiar, the DC-3, they have that oil tank up, like kind of behind the cowling there with a line. The generator ignited, burned through the line.
Well, as the generator had shorted out,
Yeah.
according to the investigation, and it burned the supply line, return line actually, from the engine back to the tank, 25-gallon tank. It had coated the inside of the accessory section where all the starters and generator and all that stuff are, and then it just ignited, spontaneously ignited. Fire was so hot, it burned the cowling, and the cowling.
You say the cowling just went away, right?
It just disappeared, yeah. And in order to suppress a fire in an engine, period, you need to have the cowling there to keep the airflow in that area down to almost nothing. Well, we didn't have that. I hit the fire extinguisher, didn't do any good. The guy I was flying with, I can't give enough points for. His air discipline was stunning.
We call it CRM now.
Yeah,
Crew Resource Management.
Yeah, now
that's why you have a 2-crew airplane. You have people that are trained because
well trained.
Yeah,
we'll say that. But he asked me 2 questions. He said, "Can we get to Magoo?" I said, "No." And at about 100 feet, we circled the control tower with this thing on fire. And the only other thing I told him was, I don't know if the right landing gear was going to hold. And obviously it did. And the fire department came in eventually. And
you were one of the few guys, I mean, both of you, you think about operations. The reason I bring this up, coming back with 4 or 5 bullet holes a day, unless in your case, the wing could have come off that airplane.
It was
pretty easy.
According to NTSB, we had 2 minutes before the whole thing blew up.
And, well, either in combat, we either learn from people in combat who talk about what they had, or in your case, civilian operation, but really bad stuff happen, and it does. These are machines.
Yes, it does.
And the thing is, that's why we have to pay attention to the safety on these things, even with these aircraft. Not like this airplane here, we maintain the heck out of it, but you never know when you're going to have a piece or part go, and the darn thing, starts to act up. And it's good to have guys like you around, because we learn from you, and we
The guys,
get that.
our training on all of us, you went through the same thing, has to be really pretty. The guys have to motivation one and be really well trained in the equipment, and know how to handle it, and as well as being good pilots, have their mental state that they can handle this thing without panicking.
I would like to interject one thing.
Sure.
SAC B-47s, the B-47 still holds the world's international record for the most aircraft lost in flying training accidents.
Really?
They lost one every 18 days.
Wow.
And
Really?
I had some wild experiences like you're talking about.
Yeah.
I came in a Little Rock one time, and a B-47 had crashed over Wichita, Kansas, and the control system heater was in the tail, and it caught on fire. And they crashed. Well, I was coming back from, I don't know, North Africa or someplace, and I lost my controls. I had them, but I couldn't touch it, or it'd stall. And so I came down, and it kept getting better and better and better, and I figured, well, something happened, because there was a thing down in the back, like an ice cream freezer that had a 2-gallon can in it with things around it, and there was a hole in the bottom. Well, I got my whole controls back. I was on final approach, and a piece of ice came around, lodged in the back. And I was just ready to touch down, and the aircraft went up about 100 feet. And when it hit the ground, engines 4 and 5 fell off and trundled down the runway. And when I went back up about 60 feet, it came down a second time. The right wing spar broke, and the wing wound up against the tail before I got the aircraft stopped.
Wow.
But that was a typical B-47.
Yeah, those great looking airplane.
Oh, beautiful.
Gorgeous airplane, but you hear we were transitioning so many airplanes at that time in technology. We talk about it on Warbird Wednesday.
Before we quit, I got one more little thing to say.
Sure.
Les has a hat on. This hat, there's a reason behind me bringing this. This is what we wore in Vietnam. The air commandos all wore this Australian bush hat. This is a cobra skin band around here. You couldn't get a cobra or put a cobra skin band on there until you got a bullet hole in your aircraft. I went for 69 missions and didn't get a bullet hole. My 70th mission, I told my buddy Hal, I said, Hal, when we come back today, I said, if I don't have a bullet hole, I'm going to land 4 clicks down here, take my 38 and punch a hole in the rudder. Well, needless to say, I got a bullet hole.
You got a bullet hole.
I came home, I was so excited. Anyway,
Yeah, you wrote a book on this.
Yeah, I did.
And you can go out and to our web store and pick up the book. We're also selling a lock of Dean's hair. That's why he's bald. Every purchase that gets a. But you guys, great stories.
Well, you can see the ordnance on this T-28 air.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it didn't fly very fast with the ordnance.
The interesting thing about this one behind us, it did have some, and we're going to wrap this up here in a minute, but it did have some depot time in one of the CIA depots. We don't know what it was doing, one of the depots that service the covert airplanes. It's in the logbook, but we don't know what it was doing. It could have that could have been the depot it went to,
Well, I can tell you one thing. I was also involved in the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
I flew this, but I can't talk about it.
Really?
That's right.
You flew this particular airplane?
I can tell you that much, yeah.
This airplane?
Well, not this particular
but
one,
T-28.
T-28 modified.
In Bay of Pigs. Wow. Well, that's a whole other. We'll have to do another webinar, Greg.
Well, it's got to be a classified one.
Yeah, and we'll have Dean wearing a plastic or a paper bag over his head and alter his voice. Well, I want to thank you today for joining us. Guys, this has been a lot of fun. It was just kind of, we didn't have a fire here and roasting s'mores, but We exchanged some
could.
good stories, some tall stories. Go out to the YouTube channel, smash that subscribe button, like us on Facebook, or go out to the web store. The one thing that we do have is we've got the F-117 coming in the first weekend on the 3rd in October, so you can go out and see that. We're going to actually formally retire that airplane. And of course, you can catch us every Wednesday with Warbird Wednesday. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for Under the Cowling. Have a great day.